Welcome everybody to the VREF webinar series. We have a fantastic panel for you today. We are talking logbooks and records, how and why they impact aircraft value. From VREF, we have Ken Dufour, Jason Zilberbrand, Neil Fulbright, Dick Hart, and Andreas Grossel. From the VREF Vault, we have Michael Anton Adam, and from CoFlight, we have Tal Clark. Gentlemen, how's everything going?
Good.
Morning.
Great.
Good.
Good morning. Excellent.
Good morning.
And so for our agenda today, we're going to be diving in. First, we'll be doing Logbooks 101, and then going into logbook storage, how to organize and properly store your records. Then we'll be talking about missing logbooks, how destroyed or missing records affects the value. Then we'll dive into pedigree, how buyers perceive logbooks. And finally, maintenance tracking, partnerships, and how to properly manage expenses. So just to dive right into it, Logbooks 101, gentlemen, what should we know? What do we need to be aware of when auditing records?
Well, Chris, most people don't realize how valuable logbooks are. Each aircraft has a unique set of logbooks or records that goes with the aircraft. They're extremely valuable. They represent historical representation of maintenance and service that has been done to both the airframe and the engine. It is a regulatory requirement for an owner-operator to keep these up to date. We'll discuss later what to do if they're lost or missing. But a typical example is where the logbooks need to include a total time of the airframe, the engines, propeller, current status on limited parts of all those devices or appliances, time since the overhaul, inspection, current and previous inspections, all applicable current ADs and service bulletins, and any major alterations that have been brought to the aircraft. So the basic is that it's extremely valuable to have these historical records. They will represent value. Arguably, some people will say that's a 30 to 50% loss of value if you don't have those records. I don't believe that's totally true, and there are remedies to fix missing or lost records, which we'll talk about here a little later. But the point is that they're very, very valuable, and they should be protected as well as the airplane. There is an advisory circular that the FAA has, Advisory Circular 43-9 Charlie or C, which addresses maintenance records. There's also a great presentation in another FAA publication that we've talked about in the past, Plain Sense, General Aviation Information, that will give you an overview of maintenance records and keeping those records, which I've just been talking about, and even a checklist about maintenance records and what you should do with them. So the bottom line, until we get into deeper about lost or missing, is that everyone should recognize how valuable these records are.
So Ken, I know one of the things that that we deal with on a daily basis from prospective buyers is what to do when they discover that there's logbooks missing, or they're planning on going to look at the aircraft for the first time and the logbooks and records are a mess. And I think one of the things that we really wanted to accomplish with this webinar was trying to help people avoid costly mistakes and trying to figure out what exactly it is they're looking for. And with that, I thought it would help if we shared with some of our viewers what it is that we do when we're doing an on-site appraisal, what we're doing when we're auditing the logbooks. And so I figured it would open up an interesting conversation about what we look for, what are the things that truly do impact value, and then more importantly, what an aircraft owner can do to help sell the aircraft. And I think one of those things is getting themselves organized, right? So does anybody have any war stories?
In that advisory circular that I mentioned, it has a point about lost or destroyed records, and it's very specifically, and it says occasionally that records are lost or destroyed, and the basis that you have to reconstruct them, establishing the time and service on the airframe and the engine, and prior, as much data as you can, and with ADs and times on certain components. And the best way to do that is that you should go back to prior service records or prior service centers or A&P technicians who've been helping you with that, and try to reestablish the majority of that you can. Now, obviously, it's easy on a 4-year-old airplane, and obviously very difficult on a 40-year-old airplane. So there's a big variance there of being able to do that. But that is the only recommendation that the FAA has. Traditionally, we would have paper or archived records on some form of paper. Nowadays, there are more computerized versions, which makes it a lot easier, more sophisticated aircraft. But if it's not available, then it is the owner operator's responsibility to go back and establish much of that as they can.
But now we're talking about a really big rabbit hole we're going to go down, because equipment and the way the aircraft is operated and the size of the equipment or the type of equipment, right? Piston versus turbine or commercial versus GA, records and logbooks have a much different impact, right? So
Correct.
who wants to go down the rabbit hole first and let's talk about the piston side of things, and let's put it in perspective. Let's talk about a 40-year-old aircraft that has, 10 years of missing records throughout its 40-year history. That as opposed to a 4-year-old aircraft with half of the logbooks missing. Does anybody want to chime in as to what they would typically see as a difference and whether or not it would even have that big of an impact on the older aircraft at that point, and how many owners it's transitioned through? I mean, it's a pretty complex situation. It's just not a formula we use, correct?
Well, Jason, as you know, we both had a similar experience recently with a 40-plus-year-old aircraft that was missing the first 19 years of its records, but had everything from then on. And of course, the impact of that was not as severe had it been reversed, where we didn't have the current 19, but we had the original 19. But there was still a loss. It represented half of the flight time and operational history of the aircraft. So it had a significant deduction, but less than what it would have been had they been more current, since many of the components had been changed and were not the original components. And we were down to basically the airframe. So
and that aircraft wasn't operated commercially either. So it was, there was really no risk in operating that plane with the first 10 years or 19 years of missing records, right?
Correct, but it's still
owners.
Right, but it still has an impact, a severe, serious impact. Yeah.
But it's less of an impact had it been the original owner and he was first looking to get rid of it at that point with the missing records, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important, so that time mitigates issues, right? So like damage history and other things on aircraft or equipment, missing records gets mitigated as well, because as it goes through ownership history and it gets transferred from one owner to the next, typically those missing records are not as big of a deal, right? But let's switch now to a business jet that's still under warranty and has no records because they were lost or destroyed. Much different situation than the piston equivalent, right? And I mean, Dick, you operate turbine equipment. I mean, what would happen if you tried to operate, a helicopter commercially with no logbooks?
Well, it would be, it would, first of all, you probably wouldn't get it on your 135 or anything, because the FAA is going to require that. And helicopters is a whole nother bucket of worms with the incredible number of component cards and tracking of rotating parts, moving parts, and any of which could ground the aircraft because you don't have the right history on it, or don't have a proper overhaul signatures on the individual cards, which adds to the problem with helicopters is a 40-year-old helicopter that has 15,000 hours on it will have a pallet of logbooks. It's not like a jet or a piston airplane where you go in and you have maybe 2 airframe logs, 2 engine logs, some accessories. I'll go into a 40-year-old helicopter that has 15, 20,000 hours on it, and I have 50 logbooks, and I have 75 component cards of different components. And now those components are tracked not only by time, but by repetitive actions like RINs or cycles and calendar and everything. And it becomes very complex. And
So
any part of that that's missing is serious.
Right. So if you were going to go buy that aircraft, right, and you walk into the hangar and that pallet of logbooks is tossed across a couple shelves and none of it's organized, none of it seems to be treated with, the respect that it deserves, or at least locked up in a cabinet so it can't get destroyed by a flood or a fire. What is that telling you about the equipment you're about to go look at?
Well, it obviously gives an indication of how serious they are about all of their maintenance and all of their operations. And I find that about 20% of the time, I find that the logbooks are quite fouled up. About 80% of the time, people are pretty good. They have such an investment in the helicopter that they will tend to maintain it. But about 20% of the time, you're absolutely right. We're going to 4 different rooms, 2 different cabinets. 2 of the logbooks are out on the bench where the guy worked on them and didn't put them away, and that's where things get lost, and then you lose huge value.
Right. So pedigree, it's a really easy thing to protect, right? Just get your logbooks organized, keep them in a protected place, and get them in a digital format so they can be easily shared with people and they're never out of your sight. I mean,
I would say most of the places I go that are commercial have them locked up in a gun safe in a room, and most of the time I have to sign a clipboard that I took a logbook out, and then sign a clipboard that it goes back in, and then there's an inspector that inspects that I put it back. That's how serious they become in many commercial places.
So it's a big deal. And I think one of the problems that we see typically as appraisers is that we get contacted to help finance the aircraft, right? So a bank will contact us and say, hey, go take a look at this aircraft and let us know. And somewhere during the process, we find out that there's logbooks missing, or they're not with the plane, or they don't know where they are. So we have to assume they've been destroyed or they can't be recovered. And typically the bank will pass on financing that aircraft. It becomes a very big issue. Does anybody want to talk about finance companies and financing of aircraft and why those records are so important?
As I said earlier, it represents the history of that aircraft on the maintenance side. Now, we will come to points that overhauls are due and things change. And of course, as Dick said, that helicopters are totally different to a certain degree. But if we don't have that, financial institutions may be very reluctant to say, well, I don't really know what's happened to this aircraft in the past. I've been in hangars before with a G1 and one episode, and the whole back wall of the hangar were records and boxes. It's just unbelievable. The detail, as Dick was indicating, that it can happen with this. And do you have to go through every one of them and check it? And, is it as important for 20 years as it is 2 years? Probably not, but still it's a substantiable way to look at the aircraft. So if you see most banks and financial institutions and you call them up and say, we don't have some records, they're going to be reluctant. And if you don't have the owner operator restore those as best as possible, you may not get it financed.
And then along those lines, when we're doing an audit of books, the things that we're looking for, I think the common sense things that everybody assumes we're looking for are like, damage entries and maintenance entries. But when we're auditing logbooks, what else are some of the things that you guys look for when you're in a hangar?
Well, of course, you're looking for the continuity to see that there's, a progressive ongoing timeline to see that, what has happened or has not happened
So gaps, right?
over the last 3 or 4
gaps.
years. So it's congruent. That's important. And you of course going to be looking for any damage or anomalies that do pop up that are indicated there. A lot of the time they're not, in reference to other documents that are in the process. So you have to be very careful as you audit those records.
I also look for gaps. I did an aircraft short time ago where there was about a 2-year gap in operations, and in that time, no maintenance was done, no preservation, no running of the aircraft, no nothing. So of course that gap, there's many maintenance requirements that continue whether the aircraft flies or not, that were not taken care of or not logged. Even if they were taken care of and not logged, then they didn't happen. They weren't logged. So those kind of gaps that are anything over 3 months is potentially very telling and very serious to the value.
Yeah, and the gaps, I think, are one of the things that's like low-hanging fruit for us when we're doing a records review, right? And then storage preservation, you brought it up, so we might as well talk about it. I know it's one of the things that I wanted to bring up. Well, I think it's a can of worms, but at the same time, gosh, where do you start? So storage preservation, right? Incredibly important to have it documented properly. It's also really important to tell the appraiser or the financial institution that the aircraft is in some sort of storage preservation, because it will help address a whole bunch of questions that are going to come up real quick when we start looking at the logbooks and records. But storage preservation, there's a difference between it being done properly, right, per the maintenance manual, and then there's all sorts of varying differences between equipment types. So Dick, you want to talk a little bit about storage preservation and what you're looking for and why it's such a huge deal?
Sure. Let me give you an example. The one aircraft, actually two aircraft I did recently were 2012 aircraft that one of them had helicopters. One had 85 hours and one had 154 hours. 2012. They hadn't been run or operated since 2014. These aircraft are worth $2 million a piece. However, and there was no preservation, no storage, no running of it every 30 or 45 days as the manual shows. So obviously, and then they were put back in service. I might mention that they were put back in service not with the correct logbook entries, but that's another point. The proper inspections weren't done. In that time, many of helicopters and some aircraft and jets also have calendar issues of overhaul. For instance, the Robinson has a 12-year overhaul. These particular aircraft have a 60-month overhaul of all rotating components. And if the engine hadn't been run in 45 days, it requires an overhaul. So we're looking at a $2 million aircraft that just lost over $1 million of its value because someone didn't run it or they didn't preserve it and they didn't log it. And they can be fixed, they can be put back in service. But on another part of that is that even their future value is affected because that's almost like damage. Any potential buyer who is an operator is going to look at that and go, how is that lack of running going to manifest itself 2 years down the road? From bearings that were dry for 6 years that maybe not get changed, seals that you wouldn't go as deep in change, or corrosion that occurred that you don't know about. So he's going to offer a much less price, and you're going to have to value it lower because of the potential damage that can occur or failures that can occur, mitigate themselves 2-3 years down the road. So that's how important it is.
From my experience in Europe, we have a lot of those issues here because people very often overlook that they have to constantly operate an aircraft, or that they have to do some regular maintenance, or they have to run the engines every 14 days. And very often banks overlook these things because they say, oh, it's so expensive that we have to operate an aircraft, but they are losing in value tremendously. I had an example 4 or 5 years ago with a Bravo that was owned by a bank, and the operator went bust and the bank didn't do anything about it. So the value was almost zero because Pratt & Whitney said, well, we have to return the engines for overhaul. And the overhaul was almost the value of the aircraft. For a full aircraft, an aircraft on full programs. So they can really destroy their assets when they don't do anything about it.
Well, you bring up an interesting subject there, and that's engine programs. And I'm not quite sure that people understand that even if an aircraft is in storage preservation, it is still required to meet the minimum requirements of that contract. So for example, Honeywell engines, you still have to pay for your 150 hours a year of utilization, whether you're operating it or not. And what we find a lot of times is that these power by the hour programs or engine maintenance programs are either not in good standing or don't even exist once the aircraft has gone into storage preservation due to the reasons that Dick was talking about earlier and some of the things that you just mentioned, Andrea. So I think it's worthwhile to spend a lot of time, reviewing the records, and if you don't have the expertise to review them, to find somebody that can.
That's a very important point that you're raising. What people often overlook is when I look at an aircraft and they say, well, we have an engine program, I want to have a confirmation from the program provider if the program is in good standing, because all the benchmarks that we have in our VREF software say 100% program. And if the program is canceled, this has a tremendous impact on the value of the aircraft, because the buy-in can be very, very expensive when you have not paid for about a year or 1.5 years the engine programs. And we see this quite often. The first thing that people cancel when they have financial troubles is the payment to the engine program provider. But that's the baddest thing that they can do, because the engines are most cases, the engines are more valuable than the aircraft itself. So what we can say to our listeners is, please see that you get those engine programs paid. And you have minimum payments, even if you do not fly, but you have to pay it because it will hurt the value of the aircraft enormously.
So I know we could spend hours talking about damage, but I guess the one thing that I wanted to make sure that we did talk about is how to properly, store your records, and what are some of the suggestions that we can make to our subscribers to help sell aircraft quicker, and what buyers are doing when they're kicking the tires, and how professionals like us and insurance agents and bankers get involved with aircraft and what they're looking for in records, because I think we all have a different perspective. And so one of those things is how to store them, and what do you do with them when they are stored. And so for those that aren't aware, the FAA is making a huge push to go digital. I think all new aircraft coming out of the manufacturer have digital logbooks. I wanted to introduce Tal from CoFlight and Michael from the Vault so that they could go ahead and talk a little bit about how to properly store records, where you should store them when they're digital, what's the difference between putting them on the cloud versus having them on your hard drive. Is there a difference between hard copies and digital formats from a legality standpoint? So with that, I'd like to hand it off to Tal first, because this is primarily what CoFlight does. So if, Tal, you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, and I'm also an owner, so I've got one of those 50-year-old aircraft you guys have been talking about, and it's really interesting. I've got a box full of logbooks, and it's a 50-year-old Baron, by the way. So
you'll be running home after this to get your own logbooks organized, right?
Yeah, that's right. So a lot of complexity there, and mine are going to be digital for sure. And that's one of the things we recognize with CoFlight. And then general aviation community, there just hasn't been the tools to work with, right? A lot of times in the commercial space, Part 135, et cetera, there have been some decent tools and probably some good storage plans. But in general aviation, some of it is just technology not available. Some of it is, the owner's a little bit more relaxed probably in the general aviation community. And I think at some point, we want to change that a little bit. We want to give them the tools to make sure they have the opportunity to manage their aircraft and store their aircraft. So what CoFlight does is it essentially provides all of the tools you need to manage and actually be aware of your aircraft, right? So start with, there's really two phases, right? You've got 50 years worth of logbooks and 10 years worth of logbooks or whatever it may be. Let's store those for you. So CoFlight will provide an interface and the support to digitally store those logbooks and provide those to the VREF vault. So we're going to be the interface, engage with those general aviation pilots out there that are already using CoFlight and that will use CoFlight, and make sure that we store those records in a place that are going to be secure and also going to be accessible to them. And that's where VREF Vault and CoFlight are going to work together on that. So once you've got those records stored, right, they're protected. And I'll let Michael touch more on that in a little bit about how he's going to do that, protect the records and make them available. But at the same time, then you've got going forward work. So as you go forward with that aircraft, what story are you going to be telling going forward? And so you need to build that digital footprint, move it from a paper footprint that we've all been using since the beginning of flight, actually, and move to a digital footprint that allows an A&P to actually sign off on aircraft digitally, make sure that's done the right way. So we're going to build all that out. Today, what CoFlight does is it provides a communication platform, not only for the owner of the aircraft, but everybody that we call in the ownership circle of that aircraft. So it could be your banker, could be your insurance broker, it could be your other partners in the aircraft. So as work occurs with that aircraft, or you have inspection intervals that are coming up on that aircraft, through CoFlight, everybody is aware of it. So that's what we're really trying to build, and make sure we get that out to the community and just improve the way that we manage these aircraft and make the tools available to do that digitally.
Just getting your logbooks in it, you talked about it a little bit, but I want to make sure people understand this is a habitual, change that you have to go through when you go through this transformation from paper records to digital.
Many of these aircraft have things. This is a little bit different than the logbook question, but I want to make sure we talked about this, in that, the Baron has recurring ADs, and many other aircraft have recurring ADs, but you have general aviation owners out there flying these aircraft today with really no awareness of what their ADs are or when they might reoccur in the case of reoccurrence. So we give the tools to track that as well. And, you have your paper logbooks and all the dates associated with when you need to do that next DLT check, or even your annual or your transponder check, or all the, the things that we're required to do as aircraft owners. Those dates are actually in your paper logbooks today. You don't have those in the aircraft with you. So you're going out to fly, and you're supposed to have an awareness of the airworthiness of your aircraft And just in many cases today, we just don't, because those dates, again, are stuck in your closet somewhere, or stuck in a gun safe, somebody mentioned. So we want to bring that awareness with it as well. So make that full transition. You know where your aircraft is. And then you do keep those records digitally going forward, Jason. So it just builds on top of each other. So the next time you take care of that recurring AD, it automatically rolls over to the next date. So you have full awareness of when that's going to be expected and when that occurs. So we can just continue bringing those tools to people. I think it's going to be very helpful to the community, and that's our goal. I mean, I think a lot of our general aviation owners out there expect our AMP is going to take care of all this for them. And they do in many cases, in most cases. But I think all of us know in a lot of cases, that's not what the FARs say, right? It's not your AMP's responsibility to ensure the airworthiness of the aircraft. It's the pilot, by extension, the owner in many cases. So that's what we're trying to do, give you those tools that you know what the airworthiness of the aircraft is, and that you don't fly through that 100-hour up-block roller inspection on your bearing, before you get it done again.
Well,
so those
it's
are all
kind
things
of
we're trying to work on.
fascinating, that all of these tools have existed in the turbine world for decades, and yet, right, the GA side of the industry has been completely ignored, and for a lot, they're one-man shows, right? These are owner-operators. They don't have the resources, and you would think that some of this stuff would have been implemented a long time ago, but I mean, Ken and I talk about this all the time. I mean, if there's one easy way to increase the value of your aircraft, it's to treat the records like they're, the Bible, protect them, keep them, stored properly. And it's not that you're going to gain a whole lot, there's not a lot of upside, but the downside is huge, right? By not doing those things, you run the risk of not being able to sell your aircraft or not being able to finance it. So along those lines, Michael, you want to, introduce yourself, because I think nobody knows who you are, so we'd love to meet you. But more importantly than that, can you talk a little bit about the blockchain and what cloud storage is versus digital storage, and then why any of this matters, and how the vault kind of works its magic and why it exists?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in a really interesting time right now. So everything's going more and more digital. When things go more digital, that just increases the value of data. I think we've all established here that logbooks are a form of data, and that is very valuable, obviously, to your aircraft. Now, with that being said, not everybody is going to go digital right away. Not every pilot has the same workflow. We'll have some on awesome platforms like CoFlight, and some that are still going to be using paper, probably, forever. With that being said, we can't ignore the fact that we are in this digital age, and we have now solutions, especially now in general aviation with CoFlight and the Vault, to make storage more secure and easier. Somebody mentioned that when they go on site for an appraisal, they see logbooks in gun safes, right? So that's maybe a proper way to do it, to have these things in a safe environment. So if you think of the Vault, you can really think of it as your digital gun safe to keep your records. But if people want to go in and check in and look at these logbooks, or if you need to share these logbooks or records with anybody, you can now do that in a secure digital environment. So that's really what we're establishing with the Vault. We're kind of bridging the world between the paper-based world of logbooks and records and the digital world of logbooks and records, such as CoFlight. So here is a very quick demo of the VREF Vault. Once you're in your dashboard environment, which you see here, you go ahead and click on your aircraft portfolios. You'll see I have multiple aircrafts uploaded, fixed wing, turbines, helicopter piston turbines. These are all aircrafts that I've put into my environment. Adding an aircraft is really, really easy. You go into add an aircraft. You select what type you're going to be adding. So a fixed wing, piston power, and let's do a twin engine. So our portal links up with the FAA's database. So all you have to do is add in your tail number, and it will search FAA database and pre-populate all of your information. From here, you can either take a picture of your aircraft if you're using a phone or a mobile device, and it will upload here, or you can browse your files if you're on a desktop and add a picture of your aircraft. This is this corresponding aircraft. You can save. And just like that, your aircraft has been added to your aircraft portfolio. Now, within each aircraft, you can view the details for each aircraft. This is one that has a few records. You'll see logbooks, maintenance records, additional records. There's some cheats here. Will tell you, the most recent documents that have been added and some activity that you've done. Also tasks that you've assigned yourself. But sticking with logbooks and documentation, you can go into your logbooks. Here I only have one inputted. And here's that book right here. You would open it up and you would see an example of that document. Here I just have a test document in here. From here you can print, download, whatever you need to do with your logbook. Uploading a log is very simple. You go ahead and you hit add log. You would type in what type of log it is, or what type of flight log it is, the original date of that log. So if it was from a flight that happened, a week ago, a month ago, 2 days ago, the name and any notes that you want to add. If you want to take a picture of it, so let's say it's a physical logbook, you would hit take a picture, and you would have the ability to take a picture of whatever you need to take a picture of. So it's the physical paper or something that you've printed out. If you have a digital logbook on your laptop, so you can either drag and drop it on here, or you can browse your files and go ahead and pull in any type of log that you would like to pull in, or pull in that log. Once you pull it in, you hit save, and then that logbook would be saved into your logbook folder here underneath that aircraft. The same goes with maintenance records. You add it the exact same way as you do a logbook. And then we have a spot for additional records as well, in case you want to add in any additional documents that you feel are important to that aircraft. Now, once you have your aircraft in order with all of your documentation, you can go ahead and then share that information with any of the contacts that you've put into your Vault portal. So let's say you're about to sell your aircraft and you need to send information to, let's just say, John in St. Pete, Florida. I'm just making that up. You would go ahead and you would either find him in your contacts to send it to him, or you would add his email here, and then you would hit share, and then John would get a read-only version of this aircraft and all the documentation in his version of the Vault. So he wouldn't be able to manipulate or change any of that whatsoever. It would just be able to view it and share it with whatever he needs to do to assess that aircraft. So that's uploading and sharing documents within the VREF Vault. Again, it's super easy, really clean. And one thing to remember is that everything that is put into the Vault is very secure. We use cryptographic signatures to protect all of your information and documentation.
Anybody that's going to have to touch that aircraft or its records can receive them and know that they are correct, right? That they haven't been manipulated, they haven't been destroyed or altered. Two, they'll know that the owner of those records they're not truly leaving their possession, right? They're getting an access point to them. So whether you're a bank trying to do loan compliance or figure out if there's going to be a transaction, or whether if the bank's doing active asset management, right? So they can pull those records up through the blockchain, know that they're legitimate, know they haven't been altered, and know that they're accurate and in real time, and they're never leaving the owner's possession. So we're really talking about giving people access to logbooks for the first time, in a true digital format. Now, one of the things that I wanted you to explain was the difference between this and just putting them on the cloud. I mean, why can't you just throw them in Dropbox? Why can't you just store them on a hard drive? I've got about 10 terabytes of hard drives behind me. Why can't I just store my logbooks on a hard drive and then stick it in a FedEx envelope and send it to Neil for him to take a look at it?
The hard drive version is really no different than a paper logbook, except for that it's in digital format. This has the same type of security concerns and the same type of damage concerns. The cloud environment allows you to share your information with others, but still there's a chance of that information being altered or deleted or lost, depending what type of permissions you give to people. You know, I'm sure we've all been, or at least I know I've been in environments at work where, you know, we have a shared Google Drive or we have a shared Dropbox, and somebody accidentally deletes one of the documents that's in there, right? So, so that's that environment. What you really want is a cloud-based environment that doesn't allow people to change anything except for those who have permission to do it. Doesn't allow people to delete things that don't have the permission to do it. And that's just really keeps all of your records safe, but also allows you to share them with who needs to see them.
But on top of that, I mean, I think the biggest benefit to having them in the vault versus Dropbox is your ability to filter, search, and then share the appropriate data to the appropriate person you're trying to work with, right? So I think we've all been in a situation where we're dealing with a maintenance facility. There's really no need for them to have access to all the records, right? You'd want to be able to share certain things with certain people. And I think that, you know, the cloud-based Dropbox type of sharing, it really makes it challenging to keep things organized, know who has access to what. And then there's really no way to sift through any of that data without physically reading through every single document. Whereas with the Vault and CoFlight, you get all the filtering, you get all the searchability, but you also have the ability to generate reports. So I mean, we're going from, you know, basically a storage depository to true active asset management, which then should increase the value of the asset, making it easier to sell and easier to finance in the future. So I want to make sure that people understand that this isn't it's not a Dropbox style depository. It's actually a searchable, highly functioning database that will allow for reporting and identifying of things that I know as an appraiser, we look for, you know, there's all sorts of stuff that we want to see on an aircraft, and it allows us to sift through that data much faster.
Hey, so let me add to that too, as well, because we're spending a lot of time on logbooks here, and I think that is sort of the key for this and where we start, but I also want to make sure that we don't miss the fact, we touched on it earlier, that this is sort of a living, breathing tool as we go forward, right? So this is going to be your aircraft going forward. So we're going to be building data in the future as well, right? So we start with logbooks, and then via CoFlight, everything that aircraft does, including the flights it takes, the oil changes, the scheduled oil changes, all of that will be in CoFlight and be in the vault as well. So it will be secured there. So we start getting a more complete picture of aircraft usage, aircraft time, all of those things that go into the actual, you know, life of that aircraft will be available. And we've got a gentleman on our board, Richard Kane, who is a specialist in AI. He believes as we start doing this with you guys, and we have this data down the road, what we'll be able to start doing is start doing some predictive elements associated with these aircraft as well. So, you know, the start of it is storage. Then you move into adding elements on just the history of the aircraft and building it on top of the storage. And then the next phase will be sort of those predictive elements as we go forward. We hope to bring all those tools. So
Digital storage and the vault and CoFlight and everything that we've been talking about, it's truly about back to birth traceability, right? It's trying to figure out the history of all of this stuff and where it came from and who touched it and what facilities it's gone through. So fast forwarding now a decade into the future, all these aircraft that are starting to deliver today that are coming with digital record keeping, and you know the parts that were installed at the factory, and you know the technician that installed it, and we're going to have a much better picture from a pedigree standpoint in the future than we ever have had in the past. And I think for those that are involved in the commercial side are really accustomed to dealing with back to birth and traceability of documentation. So theoretically, we should be alleviating a lot of concerns that people have when they're trading parts and dealing on the secondary market.
All that can be traced quite easily, right? Through algorithms and through search functions. And if it's gone through a digital process and it's going through some type of computing, that can all be traced, right? Especially in the vault, we can trace, you know, who's touched it, who's shared it, who's seen it. That's all easy. Now, compared to a paper-based world where you're basically just taking people's word for it, or there's some type of receipt, or there's some type of bill that somebody's looked at this, somebody's touched this. So as we go forward, you're correct. I mean, the traceability and the establishing the history of the aircraft is going to be so much easier And it's basically will allow for sometimes almost an instantaneous audit trail.
I mean, this is absolutely the future. We're not going to see the paper record keeping like we did in the past couple of decades.
You know, you could have a great airplane. You could have all the logbooks, engine, airframe, and or prop. Chronologically, they could be intact. You know, the tack times lead up to the airframe total. Everything is, you know, the engine, everything is great. But it's really, you know, your logbooks are really a married document to your airplane, right? So they go together, and we've talked about that. But you not only have to look at the logbooks matching the airplane, but you have to look at the airplane, and that's one of the things that we do when we go out, and, you know, with VREF when we do on-sites, and we look at the airplane to make sure the airplane matches the logbooks as well. Undocumented installs. Owners like to add little things to their airplanes, and, you know, even if you're talking, an intercom is a great example of that. They'll add a little intercom. But even if you add let's say just you add a new position light or something like that, you know, to your electrical system, and now you've got to do, you know, to do it the right way, you've got to do a load analysis on the airplane. You got to do an interference test, make sure that new thing doesn't interfere with anything else on the airplane. So you could actually jeopardize the whole electrical system and the airworthiness of the airplane just because you added this nice little thing, and it's, you know, and you don't see it in the logbooks. You got to go look at the airplane too and make sure that everything on the airplane matches what's in the logbooks. Not everything in the logbooks also matches the airplane.
I know one of the things that we find all the time is missing STC paperwork, which I know is a huge issue for, well, I know it's a big pet peeve of Ken's, but Neil's gone off on it as well. I think it's one of those things where, you know, you always kind of sit back and try and figure out how, especially if it's a major upgrade, how the paperwork is missing. But you could see it visibly. It's installed in the aircraft, right? And there's no documentation.
That's exactly right.
If things documented and not installed, that's also something that can happen.
Yeah. If it's there.
That happens too, right? Where you know it was removed, but it's still showing up in the equipment list.
Jason, let me give you one of my most common examples are the RAM mounts and GPS mounts and cell phone mounts that I find in aircraft. Reason I bring up a RAM mount, the little ball mount that people use to mount their cell phones, GPSs, and things like that. Well, they're not FAA approved.
Of course
And
not.
I wanted to have one approved in one of my helicopters for a remote monitor so that the pilot could see through the camera that we were filming. So $2,000 later in a DER structural report, I got it approved. I got a field approve on it. So without that, it's an illegal aircraft. And the gist of my story is I was in a case where an aircraft crash, was an airplane, had a RAM mount installed illegal, you know, with no paperwork on the dashboard. And this happened to be a Beach, Bonanza. And believe it or not, Beach was able to get out of the lawsuit because they said it was an illegal aircraft. And they were let out with none of their lawyers. They walked away. And it was a death involved, it was a crash. And this shows you how serious these little things like RAM mounts or intercoms, like Neil mentioned, or things that people just put in. And they think, oh, I'll just put 2 holes in the instrument panel and mount my RAM mount and put my GPS there. You can't do it.
The truth is, guys, eBay probably wouldn't have an avionics section to their listing service, right? I mean, how many people do you know buy this stuff off of Fleabay and just go and install it? They have no clue what they're buying, right? Ken, I mean, how many times do we have this conversation on a weekly basis where it's like, I just can't believe what I just saw?
I just wanted to share an actual case that I was involved with, like Dick was talking about, trials. I went to a trial, a pretty significant OEM had a series of hangars and was using some of the empty storage hangar to store airplanes. And there was a Conquest 2 that was being stored and operated out of their hangar for a private owner. And they had a Christmas party. And after the Christmas party, the crew came in and cleaned up the hangar. Well, unfortunately, the guy left his logbooks outside the door of the Conquest. So they conveniently threw the logbooks away. So obviously the aircraft owner operator sued this OEM for the process, and we went to court in Arizona. And what had happened is that this OEM spent hundreds of thousands of dollars restoring 15 to 20 years of actual aircraft records from past maintenance, as we've been talking about here. And we went to court. It was a bench trial, no jury. So about a day of presentation from both sides, and the judge agreed that the records had been restored properly according to the requirements, and that he would allow them, and they would substantiate that the aircraft did have records restored and they were compliant. And he said that this OEM had won the case by restoring the logbooks. Point being is, it took a significant amount of money, well over $200,000, to restore those records.
That's why I think that this vault is very, very important. It's a question of liability and of risk. As you know, in Europe, we have continuing airworthiness management organizations, the so-called CAMOs, and they are responsible for everything. They have to be independent from the operator, or they can be an independent department of a commercial operator, and they have a lot of clients. Even the small piston aircraft up to last month had to have a CAMO. So it's a real problem of liability. If they lose the records and they hurt the value of the aircraft, they are liable. And I do a lot of international transactions, and we always ship the documentation over the Atlantic Ocean. What if this gets lost in this process? You will have a damage of millions of dollars simply because you have to ship paper records. So it is a very, very important thing also for all those people here in Europe that they get such tools in their hand, because the large operators, the large airlines already have these or have comparable systems, but the BA community or the GA community doesn't have it. So we can only tell all our listeners and viewers, please see that you get a comparable system, because it is out there and it is available. So if you do not do it, you will become eventually liable for not doing it, because it's the standard that we have already in place. So it's a really, really big problem. And currently I'm selling a G150 that's sitting in the United States, but it will come over to Europe, and we have to ship the documents separately, but it's a 15-year-old aircraft. So there is a lot of documents. And what if the box gets lost with the documentation?
So part of the vault onboarding process is that we've cut a deal with FedEx. So you can go to any FedEx business facility anywhere in the world, use the VREF account, and they will actually, right in front of you, you can hand them your pallet of logbooks. They will professionally scan them in with a high-end OCR, and they will not only give you a thumb disk of it right then and there, but they'll also send them to us direct. So anybody that needs help with digitizing logbooks, I know a couple of weeks ago when we did a webinar, you know, this was it's a pretty good project to take on if you've got an older aircraft and you're not flying or you're quarantined, right? If you're locked up somewhere and have access to this stuff, now's a great time to be doing it. But for the GA owners, I know winters are usually, you know, the time of year when they're doing projects like this. So get everything organized, you know, put it in a box, bring it to FedEx, get us a copy of it, and we'll take over from there. But there are tools out there. I just don't think a lot of people are aware that they exist. You know, you can certainly get your own scanner and rely on your own ability to do it. But when you have volumes of paperwork, it gets really complicated. You make one mistake and scan the wrong document in, right? You're starting all over again. So I think it's really neat service that FedEx is doing with us. And the fact that you can watch them do it right in front of you, you don't have to be worried about anything getting lost or stolen from that standpoint either.
And for people that want to learn more about the VREF vault and about how that integrates with CoFlight, where should they go to get more information?
So VREF.com, we do have a page that is specific to the VREF vault. We are looking for beta testers. We will be rolling out the beta in the next couple of weeks. If anybody is interested in beta testing or participating, they can certainly reach out to us directly. They can either reach out to myself at jason@vref.com or info@vref.com. And I think, Chris, you're going to put up Michael's contact information as well. But anybody who is interested in participating in the vault through beta, it will be free of fees until we get past the beta stage. So if you want to enjoy some, you know, an early sneak peek at the system and get a jump start and getting everything digitized, now is a pretty good time to do it. And I think that's about it from my end.